I'll let Cindy sit next to you.
I just didn't want to sit right by her.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the April meeting of the Germantown Planning Commission. We're glad to see all of our residents here tonight. The weather's beautiful outside, so it ought to be a very nice night tonight. And first order of business is to call the roll, please.
Mr. Saunders.
Here.
Ms. Hicks.
Here.
Mr. Marsh.
Here.
Mr. Hernandez.
Here.
Alderman Owens.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Chairman Harless.
Here.
Mayor Palazzola.
Here.
And we have a quorum for tonight's meeting. We have copies of the agenda. If anyone would like to come up to the podium and get a copy of the agenda, feel free to. You should note that while we had 2 items on the agenda, one has been withdrawn by the applicant and will be heard at a later date. So we only have 1 item on the agenda tonight. And our first item on the agenda, does staff have a presentation?
Minutes.
The minutes, I'm sorry, thank you. We need to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any additions, subtractions, modifications to the minutes of last meeting?
Move for approval. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Ms. Hicks.
Yes.
Mr. Saunders.
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez.
Yes.
Mr. Marsh.
Abstain.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
Chairman Harless.
Yes,
Mayor Palazzola.
thank you. And now we will have a staff presentation. Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Commission. Item 5B tonight is the Fulmer Farm rezoning on the south side of Wolf River Boulevard. This is 15.229 acres, currently zoned residential, single family, requesting to rezone a portion of the parcel to office. Location, as mentioned, is on the south side of Wolf River Boulevard. 15.229 acres adjacent to the Vineyard subdivision, zoned residential townhome, and the Bridges apartment community, also zoned residential townhome. Office zoning is, you've got Sutherland Cardiology, and then 2 medical buildings with multiple tenants in those buildings. This is the entire 190 acres of the Fulmer Farm property. This has historically been part of Germantown. It's been a single ownership by the Fulmer family for quite some time. This was annexed to the city of Germantown in 1973. As part of their request, again, this is for just over 15 acres. The developer also supplied a concept plan for this that we'll get to at a later slide. As the city has planned for improvements to this area, this particular piece of property has been included as part of land use scenarios for traffic corridor studies. This is a page from a 2014 medical district corridor transportation study. You can see assumed land use changes for the medical district. There was an assumption that a portion of the Fulmer property would be changed to office zoning at some point in the future, and so the corridor was modeled as such. This is a conceptual site plan. You can see a total of 3 buildings on the concept plan. As discussed at the subcommittee on March 20th, it's the first 2 buildings that they plan to proceed with if the rezoning is approved. These two buildings would be similar in design to the two buildings that Cypress has developed to the east on the north side of Wolf River Boulevard. Color rendering, as you can see, how there would be a significant buffer to the vineyards to the west, buffer of existing land to the remaining Fulmer Farms property to the south, and continuing a buffer on the east side of the property. There's a large ditch and a blue line stream that also runs through this general area. Staff has reviewed this. We've discussed the comments at the March 20th meeting. There were a couple of items that were suggested at that March 20th meeting, but the application was not modified based on those requests, based on factors that were outlined in your staff report, including options for a refined medical ambulance center not being needed at this time, and greenbelt designation on the existing property needing to or wanting to remain in place. And that this area, again, as we discussed at the subcommittee and also mentioned just a couple minutes ago, is a large ditch and a part of a blue line stream that carries the water over to the drainage basin that serves this area and would also serve this development as it moves forward. Happy to answer any further questions of the commission.
Commissioners, questions for staff? I don't think we have any. Does the applicant have a presentation? State your name and address for the record, please.
Cindy Reeves, SR Consulting, 5909 Shelby Oaks Drive, Suite 200. I do have some slides that I would like to have discussion about after the opposition or the neighbors speak, and so that maybe that could answer some of their questions or some of y'all's questions. So with the development of Wolf River Boulevard and the development of the medical district, then the medical corridor, we found a need for this use, and as the medical corridor district recommended that this also be used for office. This will not just be office, this will be a Class A medical office building, which there is a big need for. One building will be built at a time as they are needed, and they plan on building the first building and then putting in the infrastructure with that. We know there is a lot of fill. We plan on filling the property on site and building a lake, another lake on the property that will bring the dirt over to fill in the property. If this is approved, the Fulmer family will still remain the immediate neighbors. We will be prepared to address landscaping, drainage, setbacks. We're prepared to do a lot of that now. We've done a lot of homework as far as trying to get as much information out there as we could to be able to try and answer a lot of questions. So I know that there will be a lot of questions, and I'd like to reserve that. Any questions for you?
Very good. Questions for the applicant? Well, we're going to bring you back after we have some discussion.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who would also like to speak in favor of this application? Please come forward. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this application? Please come forward. Person on the left, gentlemen, if you'll come forward and state your name and address for the record, please, sir.
My name is Don Fromm. I live at 7289 Oakville Drive, and that is an address within the Vineyards. I am also currently president of the Homeowners Association there at the Vineyards. And I don't stand here necessarily in opposition to the proposed project. I stand here seeking clearly information and would like to describe something on one of the slides that your staff prepared. I believe it's your first slide, and I don't know how to get to it. was a slide that had the zoning on it. As I look at the proposed development here on this slide, clearly there's a couple things stand out to me. The proposed development is squished, in my terms, very close to the vineyards. I am told, yes, that there is a drainage ditch on the east side that prevents the development from going farther that way, and I would hope that there would be a significant exploration into that as to whether or not that could be pushed a bit farther to the east for our concerns. I also note that there is a substantial area south of the proposed development where if the borders were pushed that way, there would not have to be as much. Maybe possibly they could move their development a bit farther away from our established home sites. The third item that I think needs to be taken note of is there's a east-west segment there that's immediately south of the vineyards that shows as with nothing in it, and that's truly there is nothing in it. That is a buffer that was established some 20 years ago. It is vineyards property. It is my understanding that when that development was proposed, that the residents in the R-zoned area immediately south of it were concerned that zoning the vineyards RT would be a significant difference from them, and they were concerned about the impact it would have on the values of their property and the culture, if you will, of their community. It's my understanding that that was a condition that was imposed on developing the vineyards to provide that buffer, and that was met. Now, it's 150 feet. It's a barrier. It's just a break between the vineyards and those folk. We were developed observing setbacks from that 150 feet development, and so that is a culture which we saw 20 years ago and which very much impacted the development of our area. And we like our area, and we'd like that be taken into consideration as the building site is proposed for this new proposed zoning change on the former property. And I wanted you to be aware that that is a condition under which we were developed, and it should be aware that that exists in that community, and it's been a very big asset for us. So I'm sure there'll be other questions, so I think I'll stop it there.
Thank you, Mr. Braun. Appreciate your comments. There was a gentleman back here on the right, I believe, that had his hand up. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Robert Penstein. I am one of the newest residents of the vineyards. I'm unprepared for anything technical this evening, I must tell you.
Mr. Penstein, would you give us your address, please,
Yeah,
for the
7297 Stag's Leap, which is just a couple hundred feet away from the border of this project. I just wanted to say a few things about what I think that this body does and has done well in the past, and I hope will continue to do well. And that is to take into consideration the fact that we have the vineyards here, which is, and I think I can speak so highly of it because I just moved there. And my neighbors would laugh when I say, but it's probably true, that I paid way more than the house was worth because we wanted to be there. we've studied that area. We've seen that area. This is the only residential subdivision on this entire tract that leads all the way out to Germantown Road. It is, in my estimation, a jewel. And the reason that I say that it's a jewel is because it's unique in my experience. I'm 70 years old. I've spent every one of my 70 years here except going away trying to be educated for a few years. And in that 70 years, I've lived in Midtown. I've lived in wonderful parts of East Memphis. I've lived at Southwind for 24 years and moved from there to this jewel of a subdivision. The reason that we did was because of the culture of it, because as you, I'm sure that you're familiar with it, I hope that you are, but as you roll through these streets, what you see is house, you also see a clumsy guy here, but you see house after house that is dedicated to cleanliness, to landscaping, to quiet. You have a collegiality among the people in this subdivision, which to me is, in my life anyway, I've just not experienced it. I laughed when I came in and I said, I guess they don't allow dogs in here, because these are people who have their dogs all over this subdivision every single day. We meet in the evenings at the gazebo there, and we share our experiences of the day and let our pets do the same. So we're now looking at a project which is going to change the complexion of this entire strip and of our subdivision in particular. Yes, it's going to be Class A. We have every reason to believe it will be. But these are Class A homes, A-plus homes that were built 20 years ago. Some of them, these homes still have the same people that bought these properties 20 years ago or more. And today they are still Class A. Today every rose bush is clipped, every garden is perfect, every landscape, except for mine. I mean, I have to admit it, mine is not, but we're working on it. And so I would like to make sure that the great job that the city of Germantown does and the planners do here is continued in thinking through what happens to not just property values, because that's extremely important to those of us who overpaid. That's extremely important. But it's even more important to think, this is Germantown. I moved to Germantown. I came to this particular place because it is the vineyards. It's almost storied. I feel kind of sorry for real estate brokers because they never get a chance to even list these houses. They move that quickly just by word of mouth because of the perfection of this neighborhood. So what happens to the perfection of this neighborhood when we see the subject tract of 15.229 acres, which now we will see over the course, since there's 3 buildings to be built, we think, we'll see over the course perhaps of 5, 7, 10 years, tremendous amounts of construction, the noise of construction, the moving of dirt, which in this place, I mean, if one did not know, you'd think this was a floodplain never to be touched. In this place, we'll have dirt by the millions, I suppose, of cubic feet that will have to be moved into there with the trucks that have to do it, the attendant dirt. And do you see how close that border is? This is what Don was talking about just a few minutes ago. That it virtually impacts people who are living right there, who will then look out, yes, 1 minute, who will then look out onto this project. So I almost beg, in looking at this project and working on this project, your planners, think about the lighting, think about the noise, think about, we certainly don't want to see 24-hour services. We don't want to see any carnivals out there on the asphalt. We don't want to see any garbage on this side. No dumpsters on this side at all. Because it's summer in Memphis, and you know what happens with that. Not only do you have the noise of the pickups, but you also have the smells. Please take into consideration the fact, I know I've got 15 or 20 seconds, take into consideration the fact that you are going to be tarnishing, no matter what happens, this jewel over here, and please do everything you can to shield us from this development. I don't want to be political, but we need a wall. Along this side, we need a lot deeper landscaping than we have right now. This project is, asphalt is coming to us, and we certainly would want to make sure that there's plenty of control for stormwater.
Mr. Pinstein, thank you, sir. Appreciate
Thank you.
your comments. I'm going to add a couple of comments right now. One, the meeting tonight is for rezoning of this property. It is not for site development. That will be a separate meeting. If it passes tonight, then there will be another planning commission meeting where the applicant will have to come before us and talk about what they're wanting to put on the site. Okay, this is only for rezoning. So that's number one. Number two is that I understand the applicant has scheduled another meeting with the homeowners. And at that meeting, there's going to be, I would hope, a lot of detail, a lot of give and take. We want both parties to know as much about the process as possible. So we hold the applicant responsible for educating the residents about what's going to happen on that property. And I see Mrs. Reeves nodding her head, so she understands. She's been before this body before. She knows how important we view that process. So with those two comments, and the third thing is, I would ask you to hold your comments to about 3 minutes, please. We appreciate your concern, we appreciate you being here, and we do want to hear you. So is there someone else who would like to speak in opposition? Yes, sir.
My name is Robert Bostick. I live right in the middle of the development, 7262 Oakville Drive. And I've got some questions and some things to point out before we get rolling on rezoning. Can we go back to the picture where all the greenery is showing? Can we take a look at that? Right there. The buffer zone that's right there. On the other side of our property, there's another medical building. And we're about 160 feet from that building. Yeah, you can see that triangle up there that's on the, what would that be, the west side of our development? Somebody mentioned trash cans. They empty those trash cans between 5 and 5:25 every Monday morning. I know, I'm in the middle of the development and I hear them. Kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. Over there, 3 more buildings, so we now have 4 times as many big trash cans. I'm not sure I'm really happy about that. Now, can we go back to another one of the maps? Not that one, not that one. That's pretty close. The left side of this development right here, every time the Wolf River gets above a certain level, that's full of water, completely full of water. You mentioned that over the other side's a creek. This side is a creek too. It's full. When you fill all of this in, where's that water going to go? Are you going to make all of this stuff as level with our housing development? So when I come out of my house and I look to the left, I'm looking straight across a parking lot? Is that what's going to happen? How can you change that water flow? It's been a problem. There's been a lot of times when the Wolf River has come up to level that it's only been about 3 or 4 feet from our property. So I'm worried about that. The other part of it is that left-hand side right now, it's a 20-foot drop. So when somebody mentioned there's going to be a lot of dirt moved, you bet there's a lot of dirt that has to be moved to fill all that in. That's going to affect us. I feel sorry for the poor guys that live on the far side of that property. They're not going to enjoy having that in their backyard. I looked at other places on Google Earth where there's been developments, and I saw that Kimbrough Grove, West Clinic is built next to Kimbrough Grove. They've got a 185-foot buffer, if I did it right on Google Earth. How come we're not going to get a buffer that big even to begin with? I don't see much of anything other than maybe 40, 45 feet, and that's what happened at Nottoway, and they're not happy about it. I've got some other things that I've looked up. The frontage across the way, the 2 medical buildings that are across the street, they're about 1,071 feet. This is going to be bigger than those 2 buildings at 1,400 feet. I'm not so sure we like that. We have a little jewel, as somebody else mentioned. So I've got a lot of questions. There's no answers. Nobody's given me any answers. How much buffer are you going to give us? Are we going to be listening to the trash cans all the time? Somebody else told me that they get to hear the street sweepers cleaning the parking lot at the medical building on the west side. The only good time to do it is when there's no cars there. That's usually after midnight on Saturday night. That wouldn't make me happy either. And I'm in the middle. You know, I'd hate to be on either end of this development. So those are the questions that I have, and before you rezone it, I think these things need to be answered. And I think everybody in here that lives here wants to know. Thank you.
Mr. Bostick, thank you. Appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
I'm Dr. Harvey Weiner. I live at 7276 Oakville Drive. A lot of the stuff I was going to talk about, my great neighbors have already brought it up, so if you allow me, I'll just read it off because it'll be quicker. Also, I'm not against development. I understand we need tax money, and Germantown is kind of an enclave, so they need all they can get, and the land is very valuable. The present land in question and the adjoining land with the same owners is expansive and deep, especially in some areas. In the recent 100-year flooding we had 2 or 3 years ago, the Mississippi River swelled into the Wolf River tributary, causing an overflow. This overflow went on to Wolf River Boulevard, causing the need for the partial closing at our neighborhood complex entrance. If we did not have our neighbor's next door flood pond to take up the flood water that it did, who knows if this would have been a disastrous problem. Expanding the sewer system within the project may be of negligible help, since the sewers also overflowed capacity. And a new pond is so far back that it also would cause a problem. It wouldn't be as good as what we have now. Even the possibility of this flooding threat may require or suggest the need for flood insurance, which is not expensive, but the possibility alone would be worrisome and lower property values. If the property is successfully rezoned for the offices, what will be the effect on the other property behind it, which extends to Riverdale? With the increased office zoning in the area, it'll be harder to fight for better zoning and better restrictions in the future on this large area of vacant lands development. They could put, I don't know how many office buildings back there, or they could even put apartments or whatever, because our zoning has been degraded. Some neighbors have said that this development is better for our property values than the vacant land. This may or may not be true. First, construction may take a while, be congested, dirty, noisy, and involve numerous large dump trucks in and out. Secondly, the volume of traffic of all the doctors, nurses, assistants, and numerous ancillary workers in and out of the building, plus the number of patients in and out, will mean thousands of cars daily for the 2 or 3 buildings. If there are other buildings later, because of the new rezoning, these problems will be a nightmare. The future of our home values serenity and ease of traffic and other amenities is priceless and forever, just like our neighbors have said. Already at Germantown Road and Wolf River Parkway, it's terrible. The intersection, you can't get through. It takes 3 or 4 lights at the most. My son's a doctor in the area, and it takes him an extra 15 minutes. So in here, we're adding more cars in that same area. Our neighborhood, when I first came there, the thing that struck me the most was the serenity, besides the great neighbors and housing, but the serenity is something you can't get back. I'd appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Dr. Weiner, thank you. Appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else? Yes, sir, if you'll come forward.
Hi, I'm Dennis Sexton. I live at 7197 Mont Blanc. I'm one of the original owners. I moved in 1998. Our house is the furthest from the proposed rezoning, so in that sense we would have the least amount of impact. But I have a process question. Since we're not going to be talking about the facilities itself, nor necessarily what site work or engineering work or such is going to be occurring. If in zoning this, is that the time when you would require a natural area to be defined in that 15 acres? The reason I ask is, as Don Fromm pointed out earlier, the band that's to the south of us, which a number of our homes back up to, that's owned by the vineyards, that 150-foot strip that you see, that blank strip, that's defined as a natural area. And so as a consequence, as a neighborhood, we're not allowed to really do anything in there. It's just supposed to sit as a natural area. We have the same thing across the street where it's noted as RT. There's an apartment complex also called the Vineyards, which is just to the west of that, but the acreage there at the corner is a defined natural area. So if you were to zone this, is this when you would require a buffer zone, and would the buffer zone potentially be a natural area, or would it just be a future maintained area by the whomever's going to own this property? Is that something I can just post as a question and then sit down?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Mr. Sexton, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name is Selden Murray. I live at 7256 Duckhorn Drive, which is on the backside, the little kind of loopy area there, which we've been there 19 years. We love it. And Mayor Palazzolo, I really appreciate your efforts when we had all the garbage problems. You were very kind and quick to respond. My concern more than anything is, and it's already been alluded to by some of my neighbors that have spoken, is the traffic and parking. In the notes that were given to us yesterday as a board, there was comments in there that each building would have approximately 200 part-time and full-time employees. So with 3 buildings, you're talking about 600 people in there on a daily basis. Now, I don't know that Germantown really wants to pack us in like New York City. I've lived in New York City, and I know what it's like. And I really do not want that in our neighborhood. Germantown is a nice home place, and I think the traffic that we would get from 600 employees and probably at least 2 to 3 times that in patients and service people coming in, I implore you not to zone that heavily. That is a real concern. Not only the traffic on Wolf River, but getting in and out would really be difficult, getting in and out of our neighborhood onto that main thoroughfare. The traffic is built considerably in the last couple of years, and I think that is a real question for you, is how do you deal with that traffic? How do you deal with the ingress and egress to this proposed development? And how in the world do you really pack people in that much in supposedly a more quiet residential area? Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else? If not, Mrs. Reeves, would you like to respond?
Yes, sir, definitely. You're going to give me back the mouse? The red line on this drawing is a 150-foot setback line, and our actual building, and I'll have another drawing that'll show you, our actual building, the corner will be the closest point to their neighborhood, and that will be at 155. Let me go to the next document. This drawing here shows the actual different areas where, and I didn't realize my drawing would have, would be so blurry. You've got, if I'm going to take you from the top to the bottom, you have 128 feet is your first line on the right. Then you go to 101 as the second line. The third line is 155 to the edge of the building. The next line is 76 feet to the parking lot. The next line is 75 feet to the closest point in the parking lot. The next line is the 150-foot line that I showed you on the other drawing. And the next line is a 200-foot line that goes to the third building, if the third building ever gets built. These will be built as needed. We're not planning on building all 3 buildings at one time. It'll be 1 building at a time as needed. This is the proposed overall landscape plan. And you'll see we're trying to keep as much of this natural buffer over here. You've got your sewer easement in the middle, and then we'll have slope here and additional landscaping. But what Bob Sweeney's vision is to keep as much as the natural vegetation as we can, and then supplement with a lot more landscaping. It'll be very well landscaped, very similar to the landscaping across the street on the 2 buildings that Cypress Realty owns, and the building design will be the identical buildings as what's built across the street. And those are the 2 eastern buildings that look alike. They're sister buildings. So it will be maintained as well as that building is. It'll have a similar amount of traffic. It'll have similar hours. Office hours are typically from 8 to 5. There's very few employees that are there, later on in the night. And when we go in for site plan review, I know that all this will be repeated, but I just wanted to go ahead and let y'all know this is our thought process. This line here is the top of the bank of the existing stream, and I'm going to go to another drawing that will show you that, which is why the zoning line is the way that it is. And that's our proposed grading plan, which shows the natural vegetation and all this, leaving this intact. If you decide to require a fence along here, then you tear down all that existing vegetation, and that's not what we want to do, because that vegetation is a good 10 to 15, 20 feet down. So we would like to keep all those mature trees and all that vegetation there, make it less disturbed, similar to what they did behind them, and had that natural buffer area. It just will not be as large of a natural buffer area, because we're going to want to maintain new landscaping that we can control the thickness of, and the buffering and the vision. So hopefully that will give you a good idea of what we're saying on that. This is that ditch that we're talking about, and that is what determined the zoning line, and that is got over 500 acres of water going through it. And Bob Sweeney will be designing the drainage. He's a wonderful drainage engineer. He's very, very well respected, and he will take pride in doing the grading and drainage on this site. The dirt work will not be hauled in off-site. That's another advantage to this. The Fulmer family is going to live there. This is their family homestead. They have no plans of expanding this office development any further, expanding any apartments. Your medical corridor plan does not recommend any additional land more than what we have asked to have rezoned. We feel that the zoning is appropriate. It continues the medical corridor. We feel that it's good for this corridor. We don't feel that this is appropriate for more apartments, and we don't feel that it's appropriate for single-family homes with the traffic that's on Wolf River Boulevard. The 250-car parking question, that is just meeting the minimum requirement of the city of Germantown. We do not need 250 parking spaces. If we could get a waiver, we would request a waiver, and we'll maybe talk to staff about that. And we don't need 250 spaces. So that was just meeting the requirements, which as a part of the rezoning, you required us to show that we could meet all the bulk regulations without asking for any variances. So we were just trying to meet all the criteria of what the rezoning requirements required us to do, and we will have, a lot more information with the with the site plan review and design review. I have one more drawing here that also shows the topo and the ditch. And I don't know why it's so blurry. There you go. Actually, this is Wolf River Boulevard here, and this is the vineyards. This is Bob's first attempt at a sketch of the lake. This is the creek, and these are the three approximate placement of the three buildings. This was during some early preliminary designing and looking at the property, but this just shows you the extent of this creek and how it impacts the Fulmer property. The two Fulmer estates will remain. They will be neighbors. They will be as impacted, if not more, than the vineyards neighbors. The father's house will also still remain, the cabin. The lake will remain. There will be another lake built. So if you have any other questions, I would be glad to answer them. As far as lighting, there will be a 0-foot candle at the property line. It will be LED lighting. I know that's going above and beyond what y'all asked for zoning, but we already know that that is in our commitment. These are identical buildings to the two buildings across the street. They will be maintained as well as those buildings. We will have specific hours for our trash pickup. I know that's a big concern. The Cypress Realty has a company that goes around to their sites and picks up any kind of trash that's just on site from the wind, and they maintain their sites 4 times a week with this trash company that comes by and picks that up. As I said, the medical corridor does not recommend any additional zoning other than residential behind this parcel, and we would hope that you would approve our zoning, please.
Thank you, Mrs. Reeves. Commissioners, do we have questions? Commissioner Hicks?
I'll ask staff a question. With regards to the R zoning, can you tell me what density could be there? How many homes could be built? The current zoning.
Under the current zoning, you're looking at approximately 3 houses per acre, 15,000 square foot lots.
15 acres, was that worth?
It's 15 acres, so 15 times 45 lots. 15.229 acres.
The reason I ask that is to point out what is and what could be with regards to density. And with a residential neighborhood, what kind of buffer could we see? Or what have we asked for in the past? Yeah, I know, yeah, not much. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hicks, can you restate the question?
She was asking if there was residential zoning to maintain there on that property. Is there any separation as far as buffering between residential to RT?
There are no buffers required as part of the zoning districts, both residential or office.
Not required.
I mean, landscape buffer. I mean, the natural area to which some of the residents referred to was part of the site development process. There are the bulk regulation buffers that are part of requirements, but in terms of specific natural areas, 150 foot wide, those types of things, that's part of the site development process.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question of staff, if I could, please.
Certainly.
In regard to the 150-foot buffer, is RT zoning not classified also for apartment complex?
Yes, sir, it is.
And is that the reason why, when it was approved for zoning, the people that were to the south of there wanted a 150-foot buffer between that and what could be, at time of zoning, apartments?
I would have to go back and look at the minutes, not having that in front of me.
I would think so, but would you mind checking that out and
yes, sir.
On that? But we could continue with RT down that side as equally as well as we could with office, based upon the zoning requirements we have right now. Is that that true?
I'm sorry, can you ask that one more time?
If I can remember what I said.
You asked if we could continue RT.
That's what happens. 70. That's what happens when you get old, right? I was asking. Right now, we have RT on both sides of this development with R in the center. It could equally well be changed over to RT, and meet. It can. I mean, that's still within the realm of requesting in regard to zoning. Is that correct?
That could be a request
I mean,
based on the context of the surrounding zoning,
right.
yes.
Because of what is around it right now.
Correct.
That's all I'm getting at. That's all
Other
I have.
questions? Commissioners?
I've got a question, I guess, for staff also. The vineyards, they brought up a good point of, is now the time to create a buffer zone? I don't think that it is, but y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. If you look at the zoning map that was up there earlier, that shows the RT zoning for the vineyards, all of that area is zoned RT. There's just certain parts of it that are buffer areas. So the same would be said with this if it were zoned. If we rezone it today, when they bring the site plan back, that's when we would require a larger buffer on either the west side or the south side as well, correct?
Correct.
Other questions?
I have one more question.
Sorry.
Of staff. We don't have our engineer here, but it maybe has to be answered by Mr. Sweeney. But in regard to the flooding of that particular property there, if it's graded, how are you planning to take care of the drainage off of that property? And based upon the comment that was made about flooding coming back up off of Wolf River, how would that be affected?
The Bob Sweeney, 5909 Shelby Oaks Drive, SR Consulting. The area between this site and then Vineyards is an area, well, this whole site for that is an area that is well below the 100-year flood elevation. It floods all the time. It should anyway. We are going to fill the property up to the elevation of Wolf River Boulevard and slightly higher. The area between our parking lot and the vineyards, we are not going to fill. We're going to leave that just as natural as it is now, place drainage at the downstream end of it, and have it drain across the Wolf River Boulevard the way it does right now. It will flood. Yes, it will definitely flood. We're in a floodplain. If you get the 100-year flood, it's going to get up in that area. And that's the natural way for things to happen. That's why what lives there lives there. It's a wet area. It's a wetlands, and it needs to stay that way. On the east side, there's a much larger creek, and we're doing exactly the same thing there. We're not disturbing it to leave it in its natural state. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's.
Mr. Sweeney, I have a follow-up question for you. By putting the parking lot at a higher elevation than the current floodplain is now, are we going to direct more water into that eastern floodplain, which would fill up quicker, which could possibly affect the people in the vineyard?
Well, it would be in the west. I think you're talking about the
west.
western.
I said east.
You're talking about the western side.
Thank you, Mayor.
The water that comes into there is actually coming through the pipes. There's a 60-inch pipe under Wolf River Boulevard that the water actually backs up through that pipe and into that property. We're going to close that pipe down to a much smaller size, and our drainage is actually going over to the 12 by 12 box culvert that is over on the east side of the property into that big thing. So we should be reducing the water that's coming in there. We still want water to come in. That's the way it is supposed to work. But we intend to try to cut that back as much as we can.
And I don't know if I need to direct this question to you or to someone else on the staff. The buffer right now between the vineyard's property line and the parking lot, the narrowest point is 75 feet. Is that correct?
It is 75 feet. That's correct. That is the pinch point. Generally, it's closer to 100 feet most of the other places.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioners, other questions?
Yeah, one more question for Mr. Sweeney. The water direction from the impervious portion of this proposed development, which direction will that route?
It will go to the north and then to the east into the big box culvert in the stream that's carrying 500 acres right now.
Not to the west?
Not to the west.
Thank you.
Alderman?
Yeah, I apologize. This is perhaps not germane to the zoning, but you mentioned that the area to the east, the natural area, Mr. Sweeney, that you were proposing to leave, well, you're leaving both east and west natural. How would you propose, I mean, the parking lot, are you going to slope that back from that, I guess I'll call it what is the western edge of the parking lot? Will that be sloped? Is that a retaining wall?
Well, that's a 3-to-1 slope. We have a 3-to-1 slope there. It'll be sodded and planted, and it goes down into a buffer between the bottom of that slope and the top of bank of the creek in there. It's a 35-foot buffer that will remain natural. Okay. I'd say that like we're doing it for fun, but that's actually a requirement of TDEC.
And of course, this is all assuming that the site plan that is before us is what comes
That's
back
correct.
to
That's
us.
correct.
And Appreciate Mr. Hernandez's question. The drainage will that be surface drainage that flows to the west, or do you envision? I know this is conceptual. I apologize. Do you envision that being surface drainage to the west? I'm sorry, to the east, or will you use inlets?
Oh no, the parking lot is relatively flat. I mean, we're trying to build in a floodplain, so we don't have big hills there. So there is an extensive, and you can actually see it on that drawing, there's an extensive storm drainage system in the parking lot that we will take via pipe to that 12-by-12 box culvert.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions?
Mr.
Mayor.
Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple of questions, not necessarily from the applicant, but from the owner of the property. The owners are here this evening. If y'all could step forward, I think some of your neighbors, and I think it would do us well as a planning commission as well. There were some questions asked about perhaps future plans for your family property. Maybe you can assuage some of those thoughts and just on the record tell us, I know your representatives did, but maybe you can tell us as well.
I'm Arthur Fulmer at 1570 Riverdale.
Catherine Mascari, 1576 Riverdale.
We have no future plans. We, between the two of us, haven't really discussed any other plans other than this development. Bob did draw some housing ideas at one point, but it was just a sketch that Bob did, and we didn't even really talk about it much. So the extent of our planning is what you see here, and we plan to live on the property and continue to enjoy living on the property with our livestock, chicken, cattle, horses, and our live visitors, deer and fox and coyotes, and that's our plan.
Thank you, and I think that's probably what some of your neighbors, and I know some of the Planning Commission members would not necessarily like to hear, but we just want to hear it from you specifically for the record that you plan to stay there as long as you're healthy and everything and live there.
Even if I'm not healthy, I hope if I'm not healthy, I still want to be there.
Well, and we do enjoy the cows, trust me on that. I just have maybe, and I'm concluded with the questioning for you guys, so I don't want to make it sound like you're on the defense stand or anything. I just had just a couple of other, I guess not questions, but maybe just some comments. I think some of the neighbors really were very eloquent and, some of the things that they want to see in this neighborhood. I would encourage the applicant, if this moves forward this evening and is rezoned, that I think Nottoway was mentioned and Trevure and with all those, and then perhaps, you can go back and look at Whole Foods and the people on Dogwood Road. At the end of the day, there was a lot of consensus built, and there was a lot of exchange of ideas. Not everyone left the day happy, but certainly the projects were designed differently than they were first presented to a planning commission or a board of mayor and aldermen. So I would encourage the applicants that you get to know your neighbor's leadership, that you don't give them lip service, that you try to do everything that you can to make their life as peaceful as possible, because you're neighbors, for nothing else besides that. You're neighbors, and neighbors try to do the best they can to treat each other the best as possible. So with that said, that concludes my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioners, any other questions? If not, do we have a report? Mr. Saunders.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on March the 20th, a subcommittee met, reviewed the applicant, and they are recommending that this be moved to the Planning Commission agenda. Further, that there is a proposed motion that to be approved to rezone the 15.229 acre parcel located on the south side of Wolf River Boulevard, approximately 324.66 feet east of the Mont Blanc Place from residential R to O office, subject to comments and conditions listed above and the plans and documents submitted with the application.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Yeah, after looking at this and listening to the homeowners, and I think with the applicant, that the information they brought forward, I feel like there's still a number of issues to be addressed that would be addressed on the site plan that you've heard today and that the mayor reiterated. But just due to the nature of the changing of the area and the changing of the road, I'm going to vote yes to approve this rezoning.
Mr. Hernandez.
Also voting yes for the rezoning. The criteria for rezoning is either a mistake originally or the change in the neighborhood, and I think depending on how far back we look, and traffic, I understand that even back many decades ago, there wasn't even a Wolf River Boulevard to the north of this property, and certainly a lot has transpired since then, coupled with the considerable growth in the medical office neighborhood, if you will, on the north side of that, and then further east along Wolf River Boulevard. So I think it clearly fits the criteria in my mind for rezoning to O. Thank you.
Ms. Hicks.
I'll be voting yes, but I do appreciate the neighbors being here, and I think I need to move because you obviously love your neighborhood, and I appreciate that passion you want to have for keeping that. You're here at the right time. The concerns you raised, as has been misstated before, can be addressed in the site plan. So I encourage everybody to talk and work it out, and buffers and walls and all things to be considered, but they all have a consequence too. So I hope you all get together and work out a great plan, and when you come back, we're all in agreement on what you want, assuming this passes. I agree with, I will be voting yes because of the significant change with Wolf River and the medical and the road going through.
Mr. Marsh.
I echo the comments of the other commissioners and very much appreciate the concerns of the neighbors. It's very important. Understanding as well that we're just voting on the zoning of the site itself, not the final site plan. So that is the best opportunity to address a lot of the concerns. And I think it's clear from the comments tonight by the property owner and the development partners involved that they're committed to do everything possible to make this a great project that's going to address all those concerns. I also think that this is consistent with changes in population, changes in other elements of traffic patterns and so forth as required. And I also note that this use is consistent with the medical district plan as well as with similar uses within a few hundred yards, both east and west of the site on the same side of Wolf River. And so I will be voting yes as well.
Alderman Owens.
I'll also say how much I appreciate all of you guys coming out and letting your opinion be known to us, but at the Planning Commission. And I'll try not to be verbose, but I want to give just a little bit of talk about the process for just briefly, and maybe more so than anyone in this room, I've got a little bit of history on this property in this area. As a child, I used to sneak on this property and fish with some friends of mine. We grew up in Poplar Estates, and don't hold that against me, but then later I served as the planning director here for the city of Germantown, and I was here when the vineyard was developed, and I was very proud of the development that occurred, and I do seem to recall that multifamily, we rezoned it to RT so that we could do the smaller lots, the higher quality but smaller lots, but that was the concern from the adjacent neighbors and perhaps the result of that larger buffer, if you will. This is the beginning of the process. I think we've mentioned that tonight, but if this is approved tonight, I don't know if we have mentioned, it goes before your Board of Aldermen and Mayor and Aldermen for 3 readings, the second of which will be a public hearing. You'll have input throughout that process. If approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, this will come back, as we've discussed tonight, for site plan review and approval. And at that point, we'll look at everything from engineering, grading and drainage, access, site layout, trash dumpsters, and even then, if it's approved at that level, then it comes before the Design Review Commission, where you look at landscaping and architecture and signage and lighting and all of the things that we touched on tonight, but we will nail down at that point to make sure that you guys are protected. All that being said, I don't believe that the current zoning, which is R, adjacent to Wolf River Boulevard, is really the most appropriate zoning for this site. I don't believe I don't believe multifamily is an appropriate use for this site either. And so it feels to me like office is on a major road, high-quality office that we have a precedent of before seems like a good use. And so we have to state our reasons, and I would say that there has been change in the character of the neighborhood over the years, including the Wolf River Boulevard, as was alluded to previously, and I'll be voting yes. Thanks for your patience with my long-winded comments.
Mr. Saunders?
I don't know if there's anything left to say. But I agree that the overall area has changed somewhat, but I do appreciate not only the residents but the applicant making their statements tonight and their concerns known. And I want to emphasize what the mayor says, that getting together and trying to work out something. I assure you that being involved with some of the processes that came through in the past, that although we may be approving this tonight, there's still a long road ahead before this project becomes reality. And even if this project doesn't come to reality tonight or in the future, if another project comes back, it's got to go through the same process. It's not a carte blanche here. So I'm going to be voting yes tonight with the understanding that we're looking to see some good win-win situation on both sides.
Chairman Harless?
I echo the sentiments of my commissioners. This area has gone through a significant change to the point that 20 years ago there wasn't a road there, and today we've got a 6-lane divided highway. We've got medical offices across the way. We've got a medical community in the area. So I think going through the rezoning at this time is appropriate, and I will vote yes for that. I will again add the comments that it's important for the neighbors and the applicant to get together and talk through these issues. In a perfect world, you would have been meeting with them prior to coming in here, and I would imagine had that happened, we would have probably had less than half of you in here. Not that we don't want you here, okay? But we want you to get a lot of your angst answered before you get into a situation like this. So again, I'm looking at the applicant. Please make sure you meet with these folks, walk through the disciplines that you go through. You know the steps, you know what their concerns are, and so you need to address some of them. You may not be able to address all of them. And then, of course, you're going to have to come back to us when we look at the site plan. With that said, I vote yes.
Mayor Palazzolo?
Earlier, I meant to say this to the applicant. When you're looking at your site plan, if you could put particular attention, obviously, to landscaping, we've heard that, but also to your sidewalk frontage on Wolf River Boulevard. I think your companion properties across the street, you have meandering sidewalks, or you've got significant amount of green space between the sidewalk. That would soften the ability to walk up and down Wolf River. We know that that can be pretty dangerous at times on certain stretches of that. The further it is off from the street would be more inviting. I agree with my colleagues, all the things they said this evening. I'll be voting yes in favor of this rezoning.
With that said, the rezoning passes the Planning Commission. It now goes to the BMA for 3 readings. I want to thank the audience for being here and adding your comments in a very, very polite and dignified way. So we thank you for that. If you would like to leave, you can. We're going to wrap up a couple of comments here before we close the meeting. So I'm going to ask for liaison reports. And Mrs. Hicks.
The Bike and Pedestrian Safety Commission has not met since we last met.
How'd she get that easy? The Economic Development Commission met on March the 7th. Mr. Ortis Copeland with the Tennessee Economic Development Commission made a presentation on what was going on as far as the state is concerned in working with bringing in manufacturing and other companies into the area. Also spoke a little bit about workforce training and what's going on at. Of course, once again, our staff did an excellent presentation on bringing us up to speed on what's happening in all our various corridors and getting us to speed on that. So once again, I think the Economic Development Commission is on cue to continue to look for ways to better the business community of Germantown.
David.
Yes, Parks and Recreation Committee met on March 28th. The big discussion there was the Farmington Park Playground. Of course, work is supposed to begin on that, redoing that when school lets out, and be working on all summer, and then ready to be opened back when school starts again back in May. One of the things that, in August, I'm sorry. One of the things that they did ask us to do is when they open it up that they will have some kind of ribbon cutting, and there'll be an invitation for that, and would welcome our attendance there. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. Another issue from that same playground was some issues that they've had out there with, what's the best way to say it, flagrant play and I don't know what else, drug use and things of that nature. We had a couple neighbors come speak to us. It was nice to hear them. I believe it was my understanding that we voted to have the goals taken down until until they start the redo. I think they've been taken down at this time. So other than that, that's really all we had at the meeting.
Mr. Morris.
The Environmental Commission met on February the 14th. Attended that meeting. I was not able to attend the March meeting. But a couple of topics of primary concern. One is the increasing challenge with recycling from an economic point of view in terms of the degree to which that continues to be viable, cost associated with maintaining the program, a number of things that are areas of developing consideration. And then also, most of our time we spent talking about the need for a second water tower to allow for additional pressure, both for public safety and fire purposes, and otherwise a fair amount of discussion about where that might be and the process that it will take to get that approved. But really, it was very much impressed upon me the importance of accomplishing that, particularly in terms of just the need for pressure in the system to support fire safety. So that'll be ongoing.
Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick update. At our last BMA meeting, we had 3 ordinances of interest that the Planning Commission has approved. Our wireless transmission facility, small cell sites, was approved on third and final reading. And then also our parkland dedication ordinance and the modifications to the tree ordinance were approved at a public hearing, and so they still have 1 reading to go. And I'd sure like to take this time, if I could right now, just to applaud the Herculean effort by our staff and all the work they've done, not only on those efforts, which have been tremendous, but in their ongoing duties. It's really refreshing to work aside such professionals.
George.
The tree board has not met since my last liaison report.
And the IDB will have their next meeting in May. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments?
I just want to say thank you to the Planning Commission. The 3 readings, 3 ordinance changes that we have at our next board meeting, we could not have done that without the vetting and the oversight of this Planning Commission. So we appreciate that as a staff and administration. And I know this, we don't say this often enough. I don't say this often enough. I truly do appreciate each and every one of your work on this, because I know you're dedicated. You study your packet, you visit the sites, you ask the staff questions, and you have the best interest of all the applicant and the neighbors at heart, and I know that for a fact, so thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments and the liaison reports. Is there any old business to be brought before the commission? Is there any new business to be brought before the commission? If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you.